I'm G. Welcome to the Stuff You Should Think About podcast, where I answer everyday questions about phenomena and objects. Hey, how's it going? So, today I kind of want to talk about this phrase we throw around all the time: free market. You hear it in politics, you hear it in the news. Sometimes you hear it when somebody just doesn't want to deal with regulations or paperwork. And they're like, let the free market handle it, right? But when you slow down and poke at the word free, it gets weird really fast because free can mean a couple different things. In political philosophy, people talk about negative liberty and positive liberty. Sounds super textbooky, I know, but hang with me. Negative liberty is basically freedom from so freedom from interference, freedom from someone stopping you. Nobody's putting a gun to your head, nobody's censoring you, nobody's blocking you from selling your stuff at the market. That's negative liberty. Positive liberty is more like freedom to. Freedom to actually do things you care about. So, not just anybody stopping you from learning to read, but you actually have a school and the time and the food in your stomach so your brain works. It's about having the capabilities, not just the legal permission. Now, when people say free market, they usually mean negative liberty. Buyers and sellers are free from interference, especially the government. That's the classical liberal and libertarian vibe. You can think of folks like Adam Smith, then later Frederick Hayek, Robert Nozick. Different areas, different details, but they've got this common thread. Markets are arenas where individuals acting on their own plans voluntarily exchange stuff. And as long as nobody's using direct force or fraud, that's supposed to be freedom in action. So, Adam Smith is the invisible hand guy, right? The idea that when people chase their own interest in a system of voluntary exchange and secure property rights, you kind of accidentally get social coordination and prosperity. Hayek comes in later and really stresses that markets are information systems. Prices tell you what's scarce, what's wanted. Central planners don't have that knowledge. So, if the state meddles too much, it actually crushes our freedom to use local knowledge. And then Nozick in the 1970s pushes this more hardcore libertarian angle. If a distribution of stuff comes about through voluntary exchanges from just a starting point, then it's just. Even if it ends up super unequal, for him, the key thing is non coercion. Nobody forced you. But here's the puzzle that always kind of bothers me. All of that rests on this background thing: Property and contract. Who owns what? What counts as a valid contract? What you're allowed to sell. All that is set by the state. Like, I can't sell you my vote. I can't sell myself into permanent slavery. At least in most systems, even if I voluntarily sign a piece of paper. So when people say unregulated market, I'm like, regulated by who? Because the state is always in the background, defining theft versus trade, defining what a corporation even is. If the state writes the rule book for property and contracts, is there ever such a thing as a total unregulated free market? Or are we really just arguing over which rules we like? So, once you see that, the next question is, how voluntary are these voluntary exchanges actually? On paper, nobody's holding a gun to anybody's head. That's the negative liberty lens. But in real life, power shows up in quieter ways. Take something like sweatshop labor. You've got someone in a poor country working crazy hours in unsafe conditions for really low pay. On the libertarian story, if no one's physically forcing them and they signed a contract, the exchange is voluntary. They chose it. But then you zoom out and see they might have no realistic alternatives. It's either that job or starvation or maybe dangerous informal work. So, yeah, they said yes, but that yes is shaped by desperation. Same thing with, say, a small town where there's basically one major employer. That's a monopsony kind of situation. One buyer of your labor instead of many. Technically, you can say no. You can quit. But if that company is the only gig in town and you don't have savings, and moving would wreck you financially, how free is that choice, really? The form is voluntary. The background feels a lot like pressure. This is where Marxist and neo-Republican critiques come in. Marx, in very broad strokes, thinks that under capitalism, most people have to sell their labor to survive because they don't own productive property. That dependence is a kind of structural coercion. Nobody has threatened you personally. The way the system is built pushes you. You're free in a legal sense. But if you want to eat, you'll sign what's offered. Neo-Republicans like Philippe Petit talk about freedom not just as non-interference, but as non-domination. Domination means someone has the power to arbitrarily interfere in your life, even if they're nice and don't always use it. So, an employer who can fire you on a whim with no protections has a kind of domination over you. You might never get fired, but you self-censor. You don't complain. You don't organize because that power is hanging over your head. The threat lives in your imagination. So here's the twist. Sometimes what we call regulation might actually increase people's real freedom, their effective freedom. Think about minimum wage laws, workplace safety rules, or antitrust to break up giant firms. From a pure negative liberty angle, that looks like the state interfering with voluntary contracts. You can't freely agree to work for $2 an hour. We won't allow it. But from a domination angle, those rules might be cutting down the power employees have over desperate workers, giving them more bargaining strength, more real options. It's like, are we blocking a free choice? Or are we protecting people from choices that only exist because they're cornered? All right, so if all that is swirling in the background, what do we do with the state? Is it just the bad guy that messes with voluntary exchange? Or can it actually be part of making markets more genuinely free? John Rawls is helpful here. He's thinking about what he calls the basic structure of society, like the big institutions and rules that shape your life chances: property law, education systems, the tax system, political rights, all of that. For Rawls, the question isn't just, did you and I freely sign this contract today? It's, are the background conditions fair enough that these agreements actually reflect equal citizenship? So for him and a lot of contemporary egalitarians, markets are tools that operate inside a broader framework of justice. You need certain rights, some level of education, maybe a social safety net, maybe limits on extreme inequality. So that when people step into the market, they're not doing it from wildly lopsided positions of power. In that picture, regulation isn't just random meddling. It's part of designing the stage so the freedom on display isn't fake. You can think of different pictures of the state here. There's the night watchman state, which is kind of Nozick's ideal. Protect property, enforce contracts, keep you safe from violence, and that's about it. It's like the security guard of the market. Then there's the referee state. That's more like, okay, we're going to set fair play rules, blow the whistle on fouls, stop monopolies from rigging the game, make sure workers aren't literally dying on the job. We still like markets, but we don't pretend they self-correct everything. And then there's this more ambiguous picture where the state is kind of a co-author of the market rules. It doesn't just enforce contracts, it decides what kind of contracts are even allowed. It shapes corporate law, labor law, environmental rules, maybe public health care, housing policies, all in the name of creating conditions where people can realistically pursue their own plans without living under someone else's thumb. From that angle, talking about the state intervening in a pure free market is a bit like talking about a referee intervening in a game whose rules they literally wrote. There was never a totally ruleless game on offer. So maybe the question, is this a free market or a regulated market, is kind of the wrong question. The market is always living inside a legal and institutional shell. The real fight is over which shell. Do we want rules that protect only negative liberty or property holders, rules that push back on domination and give workers more say, rules that try to realize raw style fairness in the background so people's choices are more than survival moves. I don't have a neat slogan to end this with. I guess the way I feel, instead of asking, is the market free? We should be asking, free for who? And under what conditions? And that's going to mean talking about law and power and history, not just contracts and abstract. Anyway, I'll stop there for today. Thanks for hanging out with me and nerding out on this stuff. We'll pick up more threads like this next time. That's it for this episode of The Stuff You Should Think About. Thanks for listening. If you found this helpful, hit subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Leave a comment with your thoughts or a topic you'd like to hear about. Until then, stay curious. This podcast is for informational purposes only. Statements are based on current understanding and public information. This is not professional advice. If you need guidance that affects your health, safety, finances, or legal situation, talk to a qualified professional who can look at your specific circumstances. I'm G, and I'm out.